Hi, everyone. Welcome to the In League podcast powered by She Scores. I'm your co-host, Kat Pitré.
And I'm J-Rob, back as always.
So welcome to episode 3 of the In League podcast. Today, we are talking in part about the recent events between Barstool and Erika Nardini and the NWHL. But before we get started, I want to make it very clear. If you are here for drama or tea, that's not what we're about. You're not going to find that here. We call ourselves an informed yet informal discussion for a reason. We're here for the facts and a broader conversation on sociopolitics and culture within the realm of women's pro sports. So, all in all, today we are going to talk about recent events, but then we're going to transition into a wider discussion of what we think about it and where we're coming from.
So I got to take a big breath before I start, Kat.
It's a doozy today.
Yeah, no, this was a good topic today. I just felt like I had to take a breath because just doing the research. So for our listeners, Kat and I do a lot of research on just either our guests or the topic that we talk about, just because we want to make sure that even though we're having an informal discussion, there's facts to prove the things that we're saying. And when Kat, actually, this wasn't going to be the topic we talked about. Shout out to Kat because she decided, she sent me a message just saying, I think this is the topic we should go with. And I was all for it, but I knew going in that we would have to do some research. And going into this whole thing, Kat, like I found myself learning so much more but the thing is, it never really surprised me, if that makes sense. And I'm not here to just bash Barstool or bash Erika Nardini. That's not what we're here to do.
No.
We're here to just be transparent about just what's on the surface. Like, this is what it looks like, and that's where we are. So for those who don't know what Barstool is essentially one of the biggest sports media outlets in North America, at least, with a very high following. There's a bunch of people involved, a lot of fans of the content. And for those who are not too familiar with the whole NWHL and Erika Nardini situation, well, essentially on Erika Nardini's podcast, the Token CEO podcast, just want to make sure I say that out loud. She had two women in the NWHL. They were on the show. I listened to the entire podcast, and obviously from listening to it, there wasn't anything on the podcast that in my eyes or in my ears I felt was offensive against women in hockey, or I didn't hear anything that made me think the uproar that she got from social media was based on what was actually said in the podcast. You know what I'm saying? There's nothing that she verbally said or spoke about that would have led to the controversy or the backlash she received. So the backlash that Erika Nardini received was from a slew of people in sports who felt like she's wrong, but she's not wrong for a podcast. She's wrong because of what she represents. And that's the brand, which is Barstool. And the NWHL, they put out a formal statement just saying, we do not align ourselves with Barstool Sports and everything that they stand on. And from that, anytime there's controversy with two brands, allies of those brands go out and they speak on behalf of one of their coworkers or partners. And I feel like rightfully so, Kat. If something, I think we both said, if something that happened to you or somebody on the internet were coming at you, I feel like as your co-host and friend, that I'm obligated to also make a statement or say something in defense to you.
Right.
Dave Portnoy, KFC, Big Cat, a bunch of big names, Dave Portnoy being the biggest name in Barstool, essentially put out videos saying, people were crazy for coming at Erika and this and that. And from this listening to all the videos, listening to the podcast, I even listened to Erika Nardini's podcast after this whole thing happened. And I even read her statement on Facebook. And I feel the one thing that is missing from Dave Portnoy, Erika Nardini, And most of the people in Barstool and even the fans who were coming at the NWHL is nobody takes responsibility for the history of Barstool. It's almost like every day, it seems as though they feel attacked by people for not wanting the masses to align themselves with your content. And the lack of accountability for me from the outside looking in is what is the most disappointing part of it. So I did, like I said, Kat, we were on a giant rabbit hole. We find ourselves doing a lot of research and finding a lot of things out. And in that, I stumbled on a lot of stuff. And before I go into that, I just do want to say, Kat, like I, as, and this is me being 100% genuine, as a Black man, I was always very weary of the content that Barstool, in which Barstool posted. This was
Mhm.
before I knew all the information I have now, just from doing my own research, gaining my own opinion. I've always saw like the content that will go through my social media and Instagram and things like that, because I'm a sports junkie at heart. So all the best sports content is always going to be fed to my social media platforms. But even from a young age, like I'd say, even when I first started seeing Barstool come up on social media, I never really felt like it was something inviting for me to involve myself in or see the
Mhm.
content, because at times it just gave me that vibe. You know, it
Yeah.
just gave me that energy. Like maybe you should stay away from their content. It doesn't really seem like a fit. Um, and in that, me going through the research and doing what I've done, like I get it now. I was right. You know, my opinions were right. So just to give you some examples of why the lack of accountability or the lack of responsibility for some of the content you make, and why it will be such an uproar by the masses is beyond me. So here we go. Here's a bit of a dive in the rabbit hole. So Sam Ponder, host of the NFL Sunday Countdown, where she's the host of NFL Sunday Countdown. In 2014, she had put on Twitter or tweeted out some screenshots from 2014 by Dave Portnoy. Dave
Mhm.
Portnoy is the founder, CEO, even though Barstool is owned by Penn National Gaming, he's bought out by Penn National Gaming. He's like the CEO, founder, the genius, the brain behind Barstools. Called her a Bible thumping freak and said her job on NFL Sunday Countdown is to make men hard. Like that's not it's not speculation. That's not a something that was made up. This comes from directly from your account to on social media for the world to see.
Yeah.
On top of that, ESPN, they actually canceled Barstool Van Talk due to the pushback by several ESPN employees who are not for a Barstool driven production coexisting in ESPN. I wonder why. Um, I want to say in 2017 or 2018, Willie Colon, Black man, put out a podcast titled, spelled out in an acronym, Nigger. That was the episode. Now, listen to this episode. There's nothing I found remotely mentionable into the podcast that justifies the spelling of the name
Mhm.
of the podcast. Um, I don't understand how a platform can find that to be okay. Now, here's another thing. I'm gonna put an audio to my microphone so you can hear this. This is Dave Portnoy on his platform talking about Colin Kaepernick. This is his take, and this is on social media for the world to see. This is him, August 29th. The national anthem is a huge story. Want to say something that's racist, but I don't think it's racist. I don't think if you think something and don't say or act upon it, you can be called a racist. You're gonna say. I'm gonna say it. When I heard the story, I didn't read it. I didn't know why I was saying that. I was like, oh, it's an ISIS guy. Like that was my original thought, because it kind of looks like
he is very confusing. He is very confusing. I will give you that.
Wait, you thought he was not standing for the national anthem because he wanted to like kill all Americans? No, I thought he maybe had some terrorist Arabic. Listen, maybe he was like on Palestine side or something. That's dumb. But he is first team all racial confusion. I don't know what's going on there. He has the beard. It's not crazy. He looks like he's a terrorist. Two bros, terrorist beard, terrorist skin. Yeah. So I didn't give much thought of it. I was like, why wouldn't he stand? I'm not like, oh, he thinks black people, which I guess he's black? Yeah, I think so. Okay, so I didn't know that. I thought he was Arabic. So when I'm thinking Arabic, Arab person is not standing for the national anthem, I go terrorist right away. This can't be held against me. It's just how my brain works. You can't say I don't think I would never do anything, but that's how my brain works. I'm just being honest. I can't laugh at you because I went down this road with Al Jazeera. Sometimes your brain just goes terrorism. And so Dave's is Colin Kaepernick, mine is Al Jazeera. It just happens, Dan. I just like this new. It used to be, I got a black friend. I'm not racist. Now we're doing. You can't hold my racist brain against me. Build ourselves. That's who you are. You know what I'm saying? Like, just in the clip itself, like this is the representation of your brand. Mm-hmm. I also feel as though from just watching this, it shows an obvious sense of privilege. But I also find Barstool in this to be a lot like, if you look into some of the climate of the United States of America, we're living in a world where people don't want to take responsibility for their actions. There are people storming the Capitol trying to stop a transfer of power. And if you ever see the interviews or the comments, everybody is saying that America is taking their freedoms away from them. You're committing an act of treason, but you don't feel entitled enough to take responsibility for your actions. It's everybody else's fault. I was commenting, Kat, could you imagine we got on this platform and talked like that?
It would be terrible.
It would be terrible. The backlash, we would be canceled before we even got started.
Yeah.
Like but this is who you are. There's another clip I want to play, but it's a little, I know some of our listeners might be young and I don't know, but essentially on December 8th, Dave Portnoy, he literally is openly using the N-word on his platform with Big Cat and the other co-host there. Like and you can go see on social media, it's there, but this is your representation. Mm-hmm. And this is why Erica Nardini talking about in her statement that it is bizarre. She's confused by the backlash. That will never make sense to me.
Yeah.
I can't find a way to wrap my head around it because when I go through the content and I see the content, why would you feel in women's sports? And I will say this, there's one thing in women's sports that I really can commend greater than men's sports is women's sports fights the social injustice, women's rights, the LGBTQ community, Black Lives Matter, like women's sports pushes that agenda forward. What makes you believe that you would take a women's league, and be able to align itself with the content in an outlet like that? Like this medium is not something that the NWHL is going to align themselves with. And I say this, I find this to be really commendable by the NWHL because realistically, Kat, Barstool would make the NWHL a lot of business. We'll bring a lot of business to the league. I'm not even going to refute it. It is the truth. Mm-hmm. However, where does your moral compass lie? Where do you stand on the fence? And that's why I think this is like David versus Goliath. Like the NWHL is not as big as Barstool, but they're not willing to sell themselves out for publicity and for a bigger medium for their product,
Yeah.
especially if it doesn't align with the ideas. And ironically enough, I had the opportunity to speak to a former Barstool employee firsthand. I'm not going to say his name, but if you look on the internet, you can probably find the employee that I'm talking about. He left Barstool on his own will, and he put out on social media like, I'm not standing with Barstool because I cannot represent a place that is possibly racist, sexist, um, insensitive, all these things, and put it out on social media. And I spoke to him firsthand. He's a friend of mine as well. And from everything that I listened to as he talked about Barstool, and the reason why I can't say these things out loud is because at the end of the day, I wasn't there. It's also not written in ink,
Right.
so realistically, I can't say every detail. But what I learned about business, the company itself, I mean, there's no confusion to me by the backlash by the masses. And
Mhm.
I think Erica Nardini and people at Barstool should just take a bit of responsibility for the history of your brand. And don't be so mad at everybody else for having an opinion on the content that you greenlight to put out.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, Barstool is a controversial brand. That's part of their brand identity. And I don't think that they would disagree with that. And with that, we have to acknowledge that there's a precedent with some Barstool content and some content contributors in engaging in problematic behavior that is sometimes part of racist and sexist narratives. And and this is part of the reason why we're a little bit nervous making this episode, they're a company that has historically not responded well or kindly to commentary on their behavior or the behavior of some of their fans. So it makes it a little bit of a complicated episode, but this is something that's so important to talk about, and it's something that's very personal and important to us. I think it would be a disservice to Erica Nardini to pretend that all of the promotion and attention and very clear passion she has for women's hockey doesn't exist, and that it hasn't been helping grow the audience and support for women's hockey, because it has. She's done an incredible job supporting women's hockey and pushing it forward into a wider media and broadcasting light. And that's part of the reason why, with the NWHL, it is so commendable for them to say the values of the company that you are the CEO of does not align with the values of the league, because there is such the potential for huge financial benefits with aligning themselves with Barstool, and they've chosen
Right,
to not do that.
right,
The thing is, and this is where it's also difficult for me, Erica Nardini is someone that a lot of young women look up to, right? She has become an incredibly successful female voice in the world of sports media and online content, which is an industry that is still predominantly white male and isn't very inclusive or diverse. And like personally, as a woman trying to make her way in the sports media and broadcasting industry, when I was first starting out, seeing Erica Nardini was an affirmation that despite institutionalized sexism in sports media, women could do it because she was doing it. And when there are so few voices that are like yours in a space that is sometimes inaccessible, you really latch onto it. The flip side of that is that we need to make the sports industry accessible and inclusive to everyone, to every voice, regardless of gender identity, of race, of sexuality, whatever. And we need to be aware of parts of our own behavior and actions and allegiances and words. And I'm talking about everyone here, right? Like I'm including myself in this too, but that don't advocate for everyone. The reason I said at the very beginning that this isn't an episode about drama is like one, because none of this is drama. This is all like documented fact.
Yeah.
We're talking about reality here.
Yeah.
But also, because at the end of the day, we aren't really talking about Erica Nardini. We aren't talking about the NWHL. We aren't talking about Barstool. We're talking about systemic racism in sports media, in our communities, in our personal relationships, in everything. Um,
Right.
One of the words that came up for us when we were talking about the episode previously, we do a lot of like prep work before we do
Throughout the week,
episodes.
yeah.
There's a lot of work that goes into
Yeah,
making
for sure.
episodes. But also something that you kept bringing up that I think is like the perfect word to encapsulate exactly what we're talking about is the word responsibility, right? We're
Yeah.
talking about a really complicated situation right now, in a really complicated socio-political, cultural environment in the United States. We're talking about repeated problematic behavior in sports media. We're talking about representation. We're talking about a women's professional league that is small and struggling financially. We're talking about racism being an aspect of all of these different issues, right?
Mhm.
And we're talking about it because I think that we have a responsibility, yes, as sports writers whose focus is on women's sports, but also as people to have these conversations that can be uncomfortable. And it's our responsibility as people to learn and grow from our past mistakes and to take responsibility for our behavior that maybe has been problematic or has supported problematic companies or claims or people. I'm speaking really generally here because I think this situation and this environment and what we're talking about today is something that we can all relate to. People mess up. I make mistakes, you make mistakes, we all make mistakes, but it's how you address them and learn from them and take responsibility for mistakes that really matter at the end of the day.
Yeah. I just think too, like, just from reading a lot of this stuff, I also feel like you said it best. We're talking about like a socio-political, like just the entire climate of the world we live in today. Like things now are, I don't want to say super sensitive, but people take notice to like you can't just speak any type of way about people, a certain walk of life or religion. Like you respect people as they are. Like that's the world we live in
Yeah.
now. You're supposed to respect people as they are. I just think from the content that I've seen, it's like it's a bit privileged because you do know like a lot of times you can get off saying what you're saying because of who you are,
Hmm.
what walk of life you are, what type of agenda you have, and also the type of money you have as well. You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? And but to talk any type of way about any walk of life or people doesn't give you the sense of like freedom. You know what I'm saying? It
Yeah.
doesn't make you better than anybody else because you don't care about what comes out of your mouth. You say what you feel all the time. That doesn't make you any freer than anybody else
Right.
because we all have opinions about people, regardless if we want to admit it or not. We all have opinions of of everything. We all That's just how we are as human beings. We have first responses and interpretations or impressions is the word I'm looking for
Yeah.
of people, objects, all types of things. However, we don't always vocalize those impressions or those opinions
Yeah.
because the right thing to do, and I'm not saying I have all the answers of what the right things to do are, but what I think is the right thing to do is you understand people, you let them talk, you get a sense of who they are. Like Kat, you and I, we've been doing this for a few weeks now.
Hmm.
We probably met maybe about a month or so ago. And here we are now. I feel like we learned more about each other through the days.
Yeah.
But whenever I thought of you, the first meeting we had when we met at She Scores, to the moment to now, the opinions of each other is not the same anymore. You know what I'm saying?
Right. We've gotten to know each other.
Right. And I just think overall, this whole thing is don't be confused.
Yeah.
Don't act like everybody's against you and, you know, the NWHL is picking on you, or there's doesn't make sense why people are coming at you. ESPN, the mecca of sports media, canceled your show after one episode because the staff of ESPN had a lot of pushback about your label. So when is the responsibility or the accountability to like look in the mirror, like the stuff we do, it may not be appropriate for everyone. It just
Yeah.
isn't. Like you can't call Sam Ponder a Bible thumping freak. Her job is to make men hard. Like that, there's no real excuse for that. That's what you really
No.
think. And there are a lot of women who, like when you see a woman in sports media or broadcasting or even the sport women's sports league, like a lot of hurdles were probably cleared for a lot of those people to get in those positions.
Yeah.
Like being a woman, like I'll 100% admit it. I'd rather be a man in sports than a woman in sports. You know what I'm saying? Like if I look back
Mhm.
at my looking back at my sports career for me playing football, it was a lot easier for me because I was a boy.
Right.
And like I acknowledge that. But be realistic with your content. That's my biggest thing to me. And like we said, I think you said it best at the start of the episode. We're not here to talk about no tea. We're not here to gossip. These are real accounts. You know what I'm saying? These are real
Yeah.
things that happen. These are real headlines. Like I put on a voice media coming straight from the source. There's no, this isn't a bashing. This is just a listen, this is what it is.
Mhm.
This is black and white as it gets.
Yeah. And we're not telling anyone any new information. This is
Right,
well documented
right.
for a long time.
For a long time. For a long time. And I'm not gonna sit here and say, because people have used words to classify Barstool as like white supremacists and racist and this and that. And I honestly have seen, Barstool have black guests. I just watched Devin White be on a Barstool podcast with Taylor Luan,
Mhm.
and he's a black linebacker.
Yeah.
Deion Sanders, he's black. Actually, the head coach of a historically black university. He does content with Barstool. But that doesn't justify or green light you to do everything else. Like that just
Yeah.
because that's like just because just because like they said on that little voice clip, just because you have a black friend doesn't mean you know what I'm saying? Like just
I
because
was
your
gonna
friend's
bring up
black,
that same example.
yo, I'm saying like just because your friend's black doesn't mean, you can say whatever you want now. Like
Right, exactly.
so I just I don't want to say I'm at a loss for words. 'Cause that's not really it. It's just like I don't have much else to like say on the matter because I feel like it's clear as day.
Yeah,
Don't be mad at the people for speaking their minds. Take
yeah,
responsibility for what you represent. And honestly, I feel like in the sense of Erica Nardini, it would be more commendable if she was willing to realize, like, yeah, I work for. I would like, and she even said in her post, like on a Facebook discussion, like, I know my job, I know where I work at. So then, why are you confused?
yeah,
Like, why are you appalled? Why is it feel like a storm is taking you over if you're aware? You know what I'm saying? Like, your show is called the Token CEO Podcast. Like, it kind of like stares you in the face.
yeah,
You have to take some responsibility.
yeah. And that's, I think, as we wrap this episode up, parting words of advice from two people who, I mean, have learned a lot about Barstool and I think a lot about ourselves in the content that we consume recently in the past, week or so that we've been talking about this. End of the day, treat everyone with dignity and respect. Everyone deserves it. If you mess up, take responsibility for your actions and learn and grow from them. We're all just people. We are trying our best. So Try your best to, I guess, have some unsolicited advice.
No,
You know,
I agree. No, I
I
agree.
want
I
to end
think
this on a positive note
no,
because,
I mean I feel like
gosh,
it's positive. I think it is positive. Like we can end this on a positive note. Like at the end of the day, like I don't feel bad about the conversation we just had.
no, not
I
at
think it was
all.
important. I think it was actually really good.
Really productive. There's a moment right here to
Yeah,
grow, for
right,
everyone to grow as a community.
right. I also will say this. I think also like diving so deep into like Barstool and like some of the headlines and even some of the stuff I hear them talking about like journalists and writers who work
Mhm.
for. I mean, it let me know what the type of sports journalist that I want to be. You know, how I want
Yeah.
to be recognized by people. You know what I'm saying? Like, I think we both you said it before. You know, you are aspiring to be. I think we both want to be big names in this industry. I'm not even about. It's no point of a sugarcoat. I think we
Yeah.
both realize like we want to take our sports journalism, be on TV, be on air, talk to athletes
Mhm.
for as long as we can.
We want
And
to do something in
right,
this world. We want to make it a better place through the sports industry.
right, exactly. And I just think we both learned a bit about like how we want to be perceived as journalists. And that's something good
Totally.
to take away from this too. You know what I'm saying? Um, but this was positive. Don't feel like it's on a bad note. I don't think. I think we did a good job.
I think this was a productive conversation. And as we wrap up this episode, um, if you want to get in touch with us, where can they reach us?
If you want to reach out to us, you can always find us at inleague at g. Oh, I said it wrong. At
Ooh,
inleaguepod at gmail.com. I just got really excited. You know, I love the
there we
outro.
are.
So you can find us, email us at inleaguepod at gmail.com. If you want to DM us on Instagram, you could reach out to our personal Instagrams, or you can go to shescores.ca on Instagram. And I think it's also the same thing on it's She Scores Media on Twitter.
Okay.
So
I don't have
thank
a
you all
Twitter,
for
so I'll take
listening.
your word for it. So, yeah. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. I will see you later. We appreciate you.